Good morning again. Today with Beers with Ben, we've got Highland Brewing. Their Oktoberfest Clawhammer is what it's called. It's a Marzen lager, kind of similar to Bud Heavy, Budweiser, but got a little more flavor to it. So it's pretty decent little lager. I like Highland. They're good beer. So cheers to that. So today we're going to be talking about number 22, which is called Amnesty in the Nations of Men. So for this song, the music started out like around 10 years ago at this time, actually. Um, so at back then, yeah, my friend Jason and Liz and I were starting a church plant. It only lasted a few months or so, but we were starting this plant in his parents' basement at the time, and my friend Liz and I were, I guess, worship leaders, if you want to call us that. You know, we're playing the music pretty much every week. So a lot of times we would end up jamming, just messing around, kind of ad lib, improvisational sort of stuff um, beforehand, or if like nobody showed up on a Sunday, we just jam or whatever, just come up with a riff. And this song started out as one of those riffs from way back then. Um, Basically, the opening riffs or whatever, like the guitar center clean riff was, yeah, from like 10 years ago back then. And I've always liked that riff, so when I started working on this album, I wanted to base a song around that riff, because it's not like super hard to play or anything, but it just, I don't know, it sounds kind of pensive, kind of uneasy feeling, at least to me. I didn't want to, repeat the thing over and over and over for the entire song, so of course I added to it. But yeah, I liked that riff, and just wanted to figure out a way to use it. So like the rough draft of the song, it didn't have like the dropout that's pretty much in the middle. Um, but when I was writing the drums for it, I realized that it kind of needed that dropout as a transition to the next part of the song. Because like the rough draft, it just went straight into it, and looking back, it seemed to make sense at the time when I wrote this song back in 2019. But you know writing the drums 6 months ago, or however long it's been now, it just kind of occurred to me that it needed that dropout, and I thought it sounded cool. um, how it would have this really distorted bass line, and then like the clean guitar sort of playing in the background while there's a cymbal sort of hit, and then drop back in with heavy kind of blast beat sort of thing. um, and I know that sort of thing's been done many times, but I don't know, maybe I want to say it was earlier this year. I was listening to the Labeled podcast. I'm pretty sure it was that podcast, which is put on by Tooth and Nail Records and Solid State Records as well, since they're kind of the same label in some ways, or same owner essentially. Because I grew up, Tooth and Nail and Solid State Records was my jam. So anyway, somebody on there was talking about, you know, old Zayo records, which, you know, I was a huge, still am a huge Zayo fan, and like specifically their song Savannah, where it drops out and there's just this, you know, kind of simple riding drum beat while this, you know, just overly distorted heavy bass riff is going, and just they were talking about how like nasty and just like mind blowing it was, and you know, I was like, yeah, that like that that song's pretty sick. So like when I wrote this, you know, and re-recorded it, and just that sort of dropout, with the bass still going, I think back to that Zayo song because just I love it, you know. So anyway, the literal story meaning of you know, the lyrics to this song. So the protagonist is fully in the prison at this point, and I want to say that this prison isn't like a normal prison, you know, the way we think of prisons today. Um, I wanted this prison to have different environments within it, for it to be kind of surreal in some ways and unrealistic. So, like for example, there are caverns and corridors and like sections of it that have modern architectures. There's dungeons in it, you know, prison cells. There's sections of it that would probably be more like a gulag. Sections of it that may be like something you would find in, I don't know, like a South American or Central American kind of prison. So in a lot of ways, and I think I describe it this way at a point later on, but this prison is kind of like a city to itself or a town to itself. So there's a lot of places to explore within this facility. But for the leg of this album in particular, he's more or less kind of thrown off into a dungeon section and like a prison cell where he finds himself completely alone. And there are guards and other prisoners, but no one's nearby at this point of his journey. So the cell that he's in is very filthy, and there's rats and cockroaches everywhere. But even still, he decides to do what he can to make it a little more homely, to, you know, tidy it up and organize even the chains that are within the prison cell that he's found himself, like not just within, but kind of sees it almost like his new home. Um, and I like to think that perhaps he's trying to keep a sense of sanity at this point in this song in particular. But being alone, he figures he's sort of the monarch or king of this new home. And to an extent, you know, I sarcastically add that he could be, you know, like the wildlife, their, you know, first presbyter. And so at a certain point further along in the song, he nears, well, he hears some of the jailers and other prisoners, I suppose, but more like the guards speaking about their homes and their own kingdoms. And some of these guards come to him at this point further along in the song and dare him to cross, you know, like the threshold outside of this prison cell. And this is once again like a mocking him to recant what he's said before in order to find his own freedom. And so he has, you know, this question of whether or not he's the asshole that other people think him to be. And so with that, I want to go into the personal meaning. And as I said in the previous video, it had been around 2 years or so between writing this song and then my mentor's funeral. It was probably, 2 years and a couple of months at, this point, actually writing this song and recording the rough draft of it. So a lot of this was me being able to write, backwards with my perspective of that time, in early 2019. And so the whole thing for me is about how we become rulers, monarchs in our, social circles, our jobs, homes, etc. Just fill in the blank. And I'm not I'm not criticizing it per se, because dominion is inevitable no matter who you are. Making a home for yourself, making your own little kingdom, it's something we all do. You know, even if it's, you're renting an apartment or in a college dorm, you try to make it, you know, your home for whatever time you're there, and it becomes your little kingdom. Or you have your, desk at work, or, certain things that you have authority to do while you're on the job, or if you're, you know, in some sort of lay ministry capacity at your church, even that sort of thing. But at that point in my life, I felt like I was just a ruler over nothing. But it was, my own prison, so to speak. So, like I say in the song at the very beginning, that, the quote is, "This is my kingdom built upon ashen floods." And that line specifically, in my mind, refers to two different things. And one of them was, maybe 6 months before writing this song, we had like a series of hurricanes and tropical storms come through my locale. And during one of those storms, it wasn't even supposed to be a big deal. The forecasters, didn't even say anything was going to happen. But, next thing I know, it's the middle of like a Thursday afternoon, and all this just crazy ass storm comes out of nowhere. And long story short, next thing I know, I had 6 inches of storm water in my bedroom. I collect comic books. I lost a lot of, like, maybe it was somewhere around one long box to, like half of another long box of comic books, and, probably, lost a couple of grand just from that. And then the other thing, and this wasn't, my property or whatever per se, but, my dude, Bubbles, what's up, bro? I know you're watching this. His grandparents' house that he used a lot at the time, and used to host like little game nights and game afternoon sort of things over there, like pretty much every Saturday. Like, we were always hanging out over there, like this really just nice house, and it burnt to the ground. And so, say, this is my kingdom built upon ashen floods. Like, I thought of that because, writing this song was literally like a couple of months after his house burnt down. And it was just, I mean, it's not my property, not my thing to, like, I guess, personalize it, I suppose. But I felt it for him. Like it was like just a super cool hangout spot for a bunch of us. And, I felt it, for him because he lost a hell of a lot more than I did, from the flood. Like he lost a lot. And, it was truly heartbreaking. Like, not even saying that lightly. And so, I guess I sort of used those because they were still, fresh in my mind. And that, like, because back in 2017, when I was dealing with all this stuff, um, it was sort of the same thing of, I've had this kind of imagery in my head at the time of, like trying to build something, trying to have your own little kingdom in life, and realizing that, and even some of my friends had said this later on, that like my kingdom, my city, my dominion had been completely devastated. My I remember specifically a couple of friends saying, like in mid 2017, like out of worry for me and just like the depression that I was dealing with at the time, that, just I was completely devastated, and it was almost like I was hiding behind the rubble, still being attacked, still seeing, arrows flying my way, and just hiding behind the rubble, just like, what the hell am I supposed to do right now? And so, I was thinking about all that sort of stuff when I wrote this song. And then there's a line right after, that beginning that says, it, it's just this phrase of, this cardboard world. And that was something that, a month before my mentor passed away, which I mentioned, sitting in her living room and talking about stuff, from the previous post. But that was something that she mentioned that day, was that she had this like vision, um, because like at the very end, the last couple of months of her life, she was having like all these crazy visions. And I know you could say that it's part of her body breaking down and her brain breaking down from the cancer and all, but just the way that she described this stuff, being on death's door, I want to believe that there was more to it than just her dying, that she was like experiencing some, because of dying, that she was experiencing and seeing these, visions and these prophetic things that, that it was real, and one of those visions, that she was describing that day, was seeing how a lot of the things that we build as human beings are just likened to cardboard. Like she had this vision of these like homes and cities just made out of cardboard, and yet the like antithesis of that was, these like organic, like tree house kind of things, like something you would see in like Lord of the Rings, with the that, I can't remember the like tree village where the elves um, lived, and all. Anyway, she was seeing stuff like that, but I I wrote in the song too, that I wasn't a hero per se, which was something that I kept telling myself at the time, dealing with all that stuff, was I didn't really see myself as a hero, but I wanted to be one. I wanted to find, forgiveness and find repentance, and, not just for other people, but also for myself. Um, and I know that a lot of times we like to see ourselves as the heroes of our own stories, but, I knew I wasn't, but I wanted to stand for what I believed in. And it seemed to me at the time, and maybe this applies to most all of us, but at least for me, I was looking for amnesty, um, looking for, I don't know, just safety, I suppose, um, from attacks and from depression and from judgment, um, and looking for it, in our own beds and begging, from our brothers and sisters, those around us, just looking for safety in an unsafe world. Um, so back to overhearing the captors and the jailers, the guards, um, and that section of the song and the lyrics. When I started writing this stuff, like I said, 2 years had passed. So I was writing about something that had happened, 2 years prior, but with the perspective current for that time. And so I wasn't angry or anything like that, and didn't want this song to sound angry at all. But I was very disappointed by how things had gone, how things had turned out, and I just felt completely let down. And I had a lot of worry and anxiety at that point, but I was just kind of carrying it around the best I could. And so I wanted to, in this music, take the gloves off, so to speak, more so than I had in volume one, and really not care what anyone, would think of me at all. And it's like, if there were lines or subjects that people found offensive, it really was like my brother says, or used to say back in the day, like, oh, well, I don't care, go take a lap, Like, that was my attitude in writing this music. Like, I'm not going to ask any apologies, like, even less so than I would with volume one. And so, like, this may be offensive, but, I'll explain a couple of lines here. So I say in the song, my captors brag of sovereign homes, trust with duct tape, terror, and cum. But a quickened hand removes tape with minimal pain, just as perfect love casts out fear, and a baptismal cleanses the crust of sins. And so, like, okay, Christian music isn't supposed to, use, oh, skeet, 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 kind of, cum in it, but, oh well, I did. Sue me. I don't care. In the back of my mind, writing this stuff, I thought of people in college, some of them, I guess more like acquaintances who were obsessed at the time with, getting married and finally having sex for the first time in their lives. And, I found myself around a lot of different conversations where, it's like, somebody's a couple of weeks away or a couple of months away from getting married, and all they want to talk about is, oh, I finally get to have sex and all. And, like, I don't want to say like I'm judging that or whatever, because, I can understand where they're coming from that. But at the same time, it really seems strange to think about now. In that context of, early 20-somethings that are just have no idea that, like, marriage isn't really based around that stuff. That there's much more to it than that. No matter how hard or good the sex is, like, still at the end of the day, you're having to put food on the table, and you're having fights over toilet paper and just whatever, stupid crap. But, like, my point was, as kings in our, little sections of the world, we have this sovereignty. But looking around me, especially during that time, like 2017 to 2019, I realized that many of our kingdoms weren't built on anything substantial. And so that's what I was really trying to poke at right there. And realizing, like, I say this line, to them I'm a broken monologue, and, do this word play, based off, the word monologue and everything. But it got to the place over those 2 years that I felt like I couldn't talk to anyone about how I felt or the situation with the woman I loved. And that was because I was still waiting for her that entire time. A lot of it wasn't that I didn't have anyone to trust, because, like my brother, my best friend Evan, Bubbles, a lot of people like that I could talk to about stuff like that. But then again, I felt like I couldn't talk about it because there was nothing for me to add to the conversation. It just felt like needless repetition by that point, especially in 2019. So, and a lot of it, even back in like early 2017, it was, it just felt like a dead situation. And then there were like others who like were mutual friends between me and, between this woman I loved and then myself. Some of them being inner circle people for me, that it felt the same in some ways. But, then I had, mutual friends who it became clear, by like that summer of 2017, that they thought that I was wrong in the stuff that I was believing for and waiting for. And like, we were getting into actual arguments over it, and people who had stood with me like that entire time. But at that point, it was, they put their feet down. They were like, I can't, it was basically like, I can't walk with you any further in this. And it was a different locale that I found myself in, because before that, like, I felt like I had a lot of support and people walking with me. But then I got to this point where I looked around and I just felt completely alone. So, I say towards the end of the song, to quote, the lyrics, "Father, is this hell, or merely amnesty in the nations of men, jailed while hoping for a blessed word to vindicate human suffering?" And after my mentor's death, I felt like I was mentally and emotionally suffering. I wanted vindication for that suffering, but I couldn't find any around me. And, that was just one situation. And to many of you, it may not seem like a big deal, but it was a huge deal to me. And so, this is maybe me making something universal and appeal out of something that was, super particular, just this particular situation. But, just going back into, the idea of suffering, and how maybe sometimes it's because we chose to go down a particular path, out of like our personal beliefs and faith and morals and whatnot. But, realizing that there's people nearby or around who could probably vindicate it and all, but in some ways, by inactivity and neglect, it just only multiplies that sense of suffering. And that was a major theme for me through like 2017, 2018, 2019. And so in a lot of ways, this is very particular to that time, but like also very generalized to like that entire 2-year journey of mine, of just like dealing with that stuff and not knowing if anything was going to turn out all right or not. And just finding myself kind of in this prison and realizing that it wasn't exactly substantial and that a lot of other people a lot of other people that I was seeing, kind of in the periphery around me and situations that come up is just some of it was just ridiculous during that time. Things that I was writing down basically in this book that I ended up writing over those 2 years. It's something completely separate and all to this music, but just seeing things that I thought were just completely crazy and not related to anything, with the woman I loved or my mentor or any of that, but just maybe it was kind of like, Carl Jung and just synchronicity of these things that were completely unrelated but felt like similar in meaning or, maybe even antithesis of things that I was hoping for in a lot of ways. And just, yeah, that's all I can really say about it. Parts of it may be offensive, but I'm using that as like an antithesis to my faith and the things that I was hoping for and really believing for at that time. And so tomorrow we'll go on to the next song. Uh, just builds on all of this and this whole prison feeling that I was feeling with. So cheers to that.